1071 saw Archon Maselio the Great pursue a wide variety of projects, erecting temples to the gods and renovating several cities, especially the capital, Kayam. Meanwhile, to the east, a great warlord usurped the throne of Rajasthan, Samrat Sudhir Suryavamsa. Him and his forces overcame the empire, but he was distinct in one major aspect. He was a Mandean, a Gnostic follower of John the Baptist. Mandeanism was, much like Manichaeanism further north, a warped heresy of Yeshua's teachings which were being taught further east. Regardless, he burned the Hindu temples and used their stones to build the first churches west of the Bay of Bengal. This caused a major split, resulting in much of the empire breaking away, becoming the Empire of Vardhan, which kept Vaishnavite Hinduism enshrined as holy and true. On this note of religious conflict, the wider context of world religions must be taken into account. The vast majority of the world was some form of unreformed indigenous faith, be it the variety of African spiritualities like Bori or Waki, the Egyptian Kemetic tradition, Asatru in the far north, or the largest religion in the known world, Hellenism, spread far and wide by Rome and Phrygia. Though, there were some faiths which had a more formal, centralized structure, like the Vaishnavite sect of Hinduism to the east, Vitalism around the Balkans, or Mahayana Buddhism at the very edges of the world. Of final note here are the Manichaeans and the Mandeans, which were establishing themselves as ever more powerful spiritual forces, despite their status as bizarre heretical echoes of a tradition utterly alien to all the world west of the Kunlun Shan Mountains. Back in Avarignia, after 20 years of peace, Archon Maselio Isherbellus died at the age of 70. As such, an election was held, and Archon Inamarchus Indicitus was chosen to lead the 233rd Senate of the Ephraim in its rule of Avarignia. Inamarchus was Maselio's cousin, and because of his immense popularity, he was simply able to tell the Ephraim that this was his heir before his death, and they complied. However, what set him apart was that he was a Simulchian cultist, and made it his first order of business to begin erecting temples to the Cheliatus, the honored mother Simulchi herself, and he redirected sacrifices from other temples to hers, whom he favored greatly. He also invited distant cousins of his from the Indicidi splinter house to Kayam, seeing as Sardinia no longer existed as an independent entity. All of this put the Karidii family on edge and rekindled that ancient rivalry between their houses. To the north, Rome reconquered England, imposing the will of Imperator Fabianus upon the Britannic Isles. In August of 1101, the great empires of Rome and Phrygia both made significant conquests into Africa, with Rome conquering the Carthaginian successor state Cohort, and Phrygia expanding along the banks of the Red Sea. This new Roman holding in Africa, the same size as Avarignia itself, triggered a drastic response from Archon Inamarchus, who began lobbying the Ephraim for emergency powers, proposing an Avarignian empire, the top-down nature of which would allow him to better administer the realm in the face of overwhelming Roman power. This would, of course, take some convincing. For a republic which had continued uninterrupted for over a millennium to consider an imperial system, however temporary, was a drastic change indeed, and caused unrest to stir in the Ephraim. However, the last few Archons, all of whom were related to each other by close blood ties, proved themselves to be excellent leaders and made some consider the proposition, others even advocating for a permanent change to a hereditary imperial system modeled after the Romans, with a bureaucracy rooted in merit instead of ties to wealthy senators in the Ephraim. A quote from one such supporter, a member of the Depravia family, became the rallying cry of the imperial faction. "The gods bestow wisdom 1 man in 100, yet 300 men rule us. Would not a single wise man be better?" As it stood, the Indicidi, Isherbelli, and Depravia families supported the move, while the Karidii, Tauskibilose, and Grigorise families opposed it. Fights began to break out in the public square which surrounded the Ephraim, and debate raged on for many years, all while strong defenses were erected in the north and south. In 1107, Archon Inamarchus Indicitus died at the age of 67. As such, an election was held, and Archon Epaticus Caridus was chosen to lead the 235th Senate of the Ephraim in its rule of Avarignia. He gained his seat by way of bribes and underhanded dealings, namely promising lower taxes in the jurisdictions of those which supported him, and providing plots of land in Karidii family territory for those most faithful to his campaign. As soon as he took office, he exiled dozens of prominent Indo-Aryan family members who scattered to Roman Sardinia, where the Indo-Aryan family ruled as governors. Additionally, Archon Epictetus once again outlawed the Simulchian cult. Various members of the Karidii family would be killed in retaliation, but this was not yet enough to spark a war. The Indo-Aryan family and its allies had been duly weakened by increased taxes and dues, as well as widespread land redistribution. The people, that is to say, the masses who did not own land and could not sit in the Ephraim, were broadly outraged. They saw a series of strong, outward-facing leaders from the Indo-Aryan and Ishbeli families who brought Avarignia to the very height of its power, disrespected and spat upon by a spiteful clutch of plutocrats who made life harder for the common man through high taxation and mandatory labor to local government. The Indo-Aryan, Ishbeli, and Depravia families leveraged this broad discontent to rebuild their base of power, but so long as the Karidii cohort remained in power, there was nothing which could be done. Meanwhile, the Karidii, Telskibalose, and Grigorise believed they were doing what was best for the people, that they were the vanguards of the Republic against oppressive tyrants and filthy rabble alike. A highly urban group, this alliance of families led by the Karidii became incredibly rich and ruled with impunity from cities like Kayam, while the Indo-Aryan and their supporters quietly worked in the countryside towards the end of restoring Avarignia to the mythic age of heroes they believed it once enjoyed. The reign of Archon Epictetus proved to be a tumultuous one, marred by instability and mismanagement, even if it maintained a general peace. In February of 1112, Emperor Numenios Agathoclid of Phrygia convened a huge number of Hellenic priests, known as the Flamen, together in one place, and after much discourse formalized the Hellenic faith, cementing a split between Phrygian and Roman Hellenism. Phrygian Hellenism was now characterized by a unified religious code and set of ideas, as agreed upon by a central college of Flamen, while Old Hellenism in Rome remained how it had always been, local temples administering certain areas, varying in prominence and practice. Conflict between the two great empires would increase from this point on. On the 12th of March, 1118, Archon Epictetus Caridus died of smallpox at the age of 33. As such, an election was held, and Archon Tutomalius Caridus was chosen to lead the 237th Senate of the Ephraim in its rule of Avarignia. Tutomalius continued the policies of his predecessor, adding mandatory conscription to the duties of the peasants who lived along the borders with Rome. Meanwhile, in September of that year, a group of Slavic tribes united into the Kingdom of the Caspian Steppe, a realm aligned with Rome under the spiritual banner of Old Hellenism. By 1137, Rome had finally won its war against Norland, leaving only petty resistance in the north. By 1142, Phrygia had made aggressive expansion into the Arabian Peninsula, due in large part to the spiritual retreat of Hinduism back into the subcontinent, largely due to the chaotic enmity between Vardhan and Rajasthan. In 1157, the inactive and degenerate Archon Tutomalius died of heart failure at the age of 67. As such, an election was held, and Archon Crixus Caridus was chosen to lead the 244th Senate of the Ephraim in its rule of Avarignia. He was an inbred nephew of Tutomalius, and his election struck many as hypocritical. One of his first policies was to cease all renovation projects in favor of increasing the stipend of those in the Ephraim, an increase which would not be remanded. He didn't do much else during his rule, and died at the age of 43 in 1172. As such, an election was held, and Archon Argetorix Caridus was chosen to lead the 247th Senate of the Ephraim in its rule of Avarignia. His first action was to form the Karidii, a form of secret police which acted on behalf of the Ephraim to suppress dissent from Indo-Aryan-aligned individuals. Argetorix was not only a Celt, but he was also a dwarf, and was as such viewed as completely alien to the urban elite which his adoptive family lorded over. However, he was elected to the office of Archon because he was truly ruthless. He had to prove himself throughout his life, and that manifested in his governing style. He reworked the Karidii and gave them rights beyond what the Ephraim ever intended. Instead of pledging loyalty to the Ephraim, they pledged loyalty to the Archon. They could take up forceful residence in people's homes and eat their food. They had license to kill anyone they had suspicion of, and permission to make a public spectacle of the affair. The people of the Republic began to chafe beneath the boot of the dwarf. But even so, the people would prove themselves unable, and in many cases unwilling, to cast off his yoke. This was due in large part to an incident in 1173, when a sizable band of criminals crossed the border from Rome into Avarignia, roughly 1,600 strong, and began raiding the border city of Narbonne. The dwarf deployed his personal secret police, the Karidii, and they killed over half the men, capturing another quarter and inviting the Roman governor of Gaul to retrieve them. When he arrived, Archon Argetorix instead burned them at the stake. He later sent a letter to Imperator Fabianus II, telling him he did not need to pay for the disposal of his trash this time. Imperator Fabianus, tied up in one of the endless wars against Phrygia, decided Avarignia was not yet worth the trouble of a full-scale invasion. And so, Argetorix proved himself, and went on to preside over an impressive and unwavering administration. In 1174, Rajasthan, under its Mandean emperor Chakshu II, won victory over Vardhan. However, during that century of war, Phrygia had edged them out of their position in the Middle East, therefore redirecting their power projection south, against their ancient and unconquerable Tamil neighbors. As the Phrygo-Roman War dragged on into yet another decade, Avarignia was afforded a quiet peace, even if it was held together by the Archon's reign of terror. However, even this could not last. In 1195, right as the Phrygo-Roman War ended, the dwarf's cousin, Almaladro Caridus, ran away with Constantia, the granddaughter of the Roman Imperator Fabianus Andenid III. He demanded retribution for this, and Archon Argetorix, thinking he could intimidate Rome like he did before, sent him back a letter that said they'd send her back when she was done testing every bed. On the 13th of November 1195, Rome invaded Avarignia, with designs on the entire Republic. As the legions of the Empire crested the Pyrenees, the Republic tasted death on the wind.